Dear friends, let's enjoy and let's welcome James Roy, Technical Director of BrainWorks. BrainWorks, why? James, you have a fantastic, journey. You started your career by BodyWorks and you ended up with Brain, right? So you took such, such a path
Yes,
to come to care.
Well, it's all nervous system, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Yes.
But
yes, you know, the body work, you're coming from the peripheral inwards, and the brain you're going from the central outwards.
But you were first attracted to do your the first start of your career was body work. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What did you do exactly?
Well, I had a bit of a touch, so I was looking to explore it, and I was in a phase of my life where I could, you know, I was in my early 30s, and I had the resources that I could sort of study whatever I wanted, wherever I wanted, and so I sat down and I had a little think about it. And I thought, well, if I could study anything I like, what would that be? And you know, it was the mind, clearly. The West, this is in the early 2000s, and the West had nothing to say on the topic of the mind back then. You know, it's easy for us to forget because the brain these days it's a very fashionable thing.
Yeah.
Back then, really it was not. It was a source of fear for most. You know, the unknown. So, you know, the West really didn't have the information I was looking for. So I thought, right, well, okay, then let's go to those who do have more of the information that I'm looking for. So I started out in Thailand and studied Thai massage there. And then I'd go off and I'd practice. I'd go to Indonesia or something. I'd practice for a while. Then I'd come back and I'd do another course, and then I'd go away and I'd practice again for a while. And I kept that up for about 3 years. And then I started getting into the better teachers. You know, there was a couple of village healers that I'd go back and forth and study under, Pichet Buntam as well in Thailand, who's sort of the top guy in Thailand.
In Thai massage. Always in Thai massage.
Well, that was all in Thai massage, and I you know, and then I'd, you know, and after a while I thought, well, you know, maybe Thai massage isn't quite the one for me. Let's explore a few more. So I studied under the Dalai Lama's masseur, for instance, and yeah, okay, that's interesting. And you know, but then I'd end up gravitating back to Thai again, and then I'd go with the Ayurvedic styles, and then I'd go back to Thai again. Then I'd do the Yogic, and I'd go back to Thai. So now I'm talking more about the traditional Thai. So it's not the preset routines. It's feeling in, figuring out what the issue is, and using your skill set to devise a move to resolve that. However, what I found was, you know, I could do, you know, at 2.5 hours a session, I could do 3 or 4 people a day. And, you know, there's only so far you can get in healing the planet at 3 or 4 people a day. So I thought, well, there must be a better way of going about this. So I started looking at brain mapping, and basically to chart where it was, where we started, and where it was that we end up. You know, it's a very good way of charting therapies. So when I was in Canada, a friend of a friend had just started up a neurofeedback practice. So I went for sessions, not because I was interested in the neurofeedback, but because I was interested in the mapping component. Well, the 20 sessions of neurofeedback that I had over that time made such a dramatic shift. And being in the field, I knew what it took to make those sort of deep shifts. And you know, these base perceptual stuff. Now that did almost as much for me as the last 7 years of working on myself had done.
Wow.
So I thought, right,
sorry.
okay.
What kind of shift? Because now
well,
what did you?
Well, where the real shift in neurofeedback comes is really in that deep stuff, that base, however you want to call it, sympathetic, parasympathetic, Ida Pingala, those base perceptions of the world. Is the world a friendly place? Is it a lonely place? Is it a threatening place? These sort of base perceptions that come in and inform the rest of the mind. Now I had gone an awfully long way in the 7 years of working on myself, but what had not shifted was that base feeling of not really wanting to engage, not being fully engaged with the world. Um, uh, it's a freeze response, is what we'd call it these days. And it was that made the shift. I wasn't fully engaging. My energy levels were always a little bit low. So socially I was all right, but internally there was always a little bit of discomfort. And that hadn't shifted through all of the Eastern work, but it shifted in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
Doing the neurofeedback. So I thought, right, okay, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing for a living here. This is something Western, it's something understandable, it's something chartable. And the net effects are really very much the same as the Eastern methods, as it should be. Because of course what we're facilitating is shifts within the nervous system, shifts in perception, right? And whether you're doing that through meditation and you're trying to find that sweet spot, or you're doing it through neurofeedback where we're showing you where that sweet spot is, the net effect is actually the same.
Is it?
Yeah, so that's how we ended up in neurofeedback.
Right. Oh my God, I have about 300 questions. I will try to. Wow. Okay. Let me get back to the first questions, okay, if you allow me, because you triggered me when you said that you were interested in the mind and then you wanted to study the brain. The mind, the brain, the consciousness. This is, for me, perpetual questions. And now that I'm talking to you, studying the brain, James, tell me, do you believe that consciousness and mind lives in the brain, or what do you think of this? Because we used to say that the consciousness is outside of the brain and the brain is a receptor of it. What is your perspective of that? I'm sorry to jump to that subject.
Well, no, actually, that's a very, very good question. Now, I'll give you my answer. Thousands will disagree with me. Of course, my background is a little bit different. I'm not coming into neurofeedback from the medical side. I'm coming at it from the Eastern side. And of course, within the Western paradigm, everything exists within the brain. I mean, you might as well forget about the body at all. Now, I think the first point to mention on this is and I'll circle back to your question in a moment, is that the brain and the body are classed as two separate things, but really what we're talking about is the nervous system. So whether you're coming at the nervous system from the periphery inwards, or you're coming at it from the central outwards, again, both have a very, very similar effect. So we have two hemispheres, right? And in our head, and we've got pretty much a third in our gut. The gut has as many neurons as either one of the hemispheres, and actually it gives 5 signals to the brain for every 2 that it receives. So who really is informing who on that one? Now, and then there's not just the gut. There's sub, we can call them chakras, but basically there's sub brains sort of going all the way down our spinal column. And much like the internet, you and I can be half a world apart, and as long as both of us have good net speed, it's like we're in the same spot. Now, if our net speed was poor, you could be living next door, and we still wouldn't get a good connection.
Right.
You can think of the nervous system a little bit like that. The brain and the gut, or the brain and the heart, are physically separated, but if they are connected by a big pipe, which we can call the spinal cord, then spatially they're separate. Functionally, they're not at all. If that was a very thin connection, it wouldn't matter if they were right next to each other. it would be as if they were a long way apart.
Right.
So really, when we're talking about the central nervous system, let's just get rid of that idea of spatial difference, right? Really, it's how much communication is going on between the two areas and how quickly that communication is happening, not where they're located. And that's one of the spots where things fall down, you know, in the conventional thinking.
Yeah.
Now, now that we've sort of merged the brain and the body a little bit, now I can go on to your initial question.
Yes.
So, so when we are looking at the brain, now we don't actually see intrinsic personality within there. So traits, habits, that intrinsic sense of self, that's not what we see. What we see are things that are obstructing you from that intrinsic sense of self. So if there is, we see all the damage. We see the anxiety, we see the depression, we see the poor decision-making ability, the senses that don't mesh together, all of these little things that just sort of take you away from yourself. Now, when the brain and the body are in a good functioning position, then that intrinsic sense of self just starts to emerge. And I'm sure you and all your listeners know that from their own life, right? When you're under high pressure, you can forget about consciousness and you can forget about, you know, universal love and compassion and all of that stuff.
Yes.
Right? You're just spinning in your own juices. Yes. Right? Yeah. And that's actually what we see in the brain, is where the person is spinning, where they're wasting their energy, where they're stuck, where their habits and basic drives have taken them over. Now, when that clears up, the natural result is that emergence of the intrinsic self.
The self.
So
the personality.
Yourself. Your personality. What is behind all of?
Not inside of the brain.
Exactly. It's what's behind all of the bullshit. What's on the other side of that?
Right.
You know, and you know, we can go back to any of the teachers, and they'll be saying the same thing in the same language. You know, who am I? Right? You are the thing that exists when there's nothing else. When there's nothing else going on. You're not thinking about. You're not remembering what happened yesterday. You're not planning for what's happening tomorrow. You're still.
Yeah.
And in that stillness point, and actually we can get into this a little bit further later with resonances and such.
Yes.
But when you're in that still point, which is the basis for any of the teachings, right? First, get present. Yeah. And then in that getting, step 2 is balancing out your ida and pingala, or your sympathetic and parasympathetic. In Western terms, we call it trauma resolution. You know, if we took that into modern terminology. So to your question, does it exist in the brain? My belief is that it does not. I think that 90% of the neurofeedback industry would disagree with me on that. However,
I agree with
given the background, yeah. However, given the background that I've got, yes, you know, I think clearly that the personality is what emerges when your brain is no longer busy.
Right.
And no longer stuck.
Anyway, there is other proof of that, because we are also having in our speaker, Dr. Raymond Moody, international celebrity in the field of near-death experience. He's the one that knocked these expressions, and he confirms that in a very hard science way.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, okay, I'm very relieved. I feel much better now. Thank you. Right. So you shifted from Thai massage after a certain period of time to brain neurofeedback. How did shift happen? How did it happen?
Well, you know, again, it was a matter of trying to help more people more quickly, right? The world's in a little bit of trouble. You know, I think of all times, we're probably further away from our intrinsic selves than really we ever have been. And as you can't teach people to have a touch, you have a touch or you don't have a touch, right? It's a very, very difficult, actually, I can't say you can't. It's a very difficult thing to teach. And regardless, it doesn't fit into the Western paradigm. And really, that's where the work needs to be done. You know, if we're going to sort the planet out, it's got to, we got to start with the West.
What a mandate.
Well, you know, and in doing that, it's shift of philosophy really that makes the difference.
Yeah.
Right? It's shifting that Western philosophy to a philosophy that, well, everybody is not necessarily entitled to their anger. They are not necessarily entitled to their abuse. They're not necessarily entitled to their fears. Now, in the Western culture, these aren't seen as diseases of any sort. So and so is chronically angry. Everybody just sort of maybe steers away from them a little bit, but they accept that. And they don't see it as something that's necessarily unhealthy. Mm. Whereas really it is. It's pulling them away from their natural selves. They're not making good decisions, and they're not helping. They're not helping the planet. You know, they're not helping raise us up. And
biologically also it's unhealthy. They are treating not dopamine but the opposite. I mean,
yes,
the other hormones, and they are adrenaline, and they are
adrenaline, cortisol.
Yes.
And you know, and they're not as productive. They're not helping the situation.
Right.
You know what I mean?
All right. So
right, when you're faced with a situation, really you need to be judging what that you need to be taking it at face value, as opposed to what it is that you want to believe.
Right.
But and in order to do that, you need to be quite clear.
Right. So, but before you created BrainWorks, you had to learn that.
I did. Yes. So we started out with a package system out of the States. A package system is something that sort of pre-built protocols and limited mapping ability, pre-built protocols, and a protocol is your training. Yeah. So you would do a simple map. You would see which areas are out of balance, and it was an instructional sort of system where we would sort of make our decisions on the protocols, and we'd send them off to the main company, and they would make their suggestions. You know, the professionals would make their suggestions for the protocols, and we stuck with them for about 1.5 years until we found that our protocol picks were getting better than the protocol picks that were coming from the master company. So then we dropped them. Then we struck out on our own. We trained. Now, this is back in the day where you could simply find the best people and hire them, right? You can't do that anymore. You know, there's too much interest in neurofeedback these days. So we worked at Neurotherapy Hilversum in the Netherlands for a couple of weeks. We did a course with them as well. And then we started up with Marty Woodkey, who's been doing this about 40 years now. He's just retired. Actually, he was a teacher for us. We did we had supervision from him for 3 years. We did 4 various courses with him, and he actually ended up working for us just a few years ago. Like I say, he's just retired now. When we launched our remote systems, then
with the company. So you created the company and launched that, right?
Yes. So we created the company in 2007, and it was a clinic-based practice, as all were back then. And by about 2009, kind of had to look at it. You know, I'm not one to follow the crowd, right? Just because something is done a certain way does not mean that that's the best way of going about it. So I kind of had to look at it. And I thought, well, we're getting definitely our best results when people are working intensively. You know, it's a bit like meditation, right? If you're doing meditation once a week, it's going to take you a very long time to get anywhere. If you're doing an hour of meditation a day, then you start progressing really quite quickly. Or the same in learning French or anything else. So we thought, well, we can't get people into the clinic 5 days a week. It's just they just don't have the time for that. So is there any way to start doing it remotely? I thought, well, surely there must be, so that sounds like a good little 6-month project. Well, that 6-month project was a 10-year project, actually. It wasn't quite as easy as I first thought, So our first system that we launched, tried. We didn't actually launch it with clients. It was just too complicated. It was clearly too complicated for the client to be able to figure out how to work it.
What was this system? It was a device.
It was a computer with a with a 2-sensor amplifier. It was something called a wave rider. I'm not even sure if they still make them. It was a basic 2-sensor system. They'd place the sensors. We would create the training protocol. Sorry?
Only 2 sensors.
Yeah, two reading sensors, and then of course there's 2 reference and a ground. And it's the way it's still commonly done, particularly with package systems, because it is a much cheaper way of going about it.
But right now,
however,
more than that.
Well, yes. Now we're on full 19-sensor 3D deep brain imaging. No, it has really progressed a long way.
You are rocket science now.
Yeah, well, brain science anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, that first one. Yeah. Well, that first one was just too complicated for a client to use. So then we went the opposite direction. And our second unit was just too simple to be effective, really.
Right.
So then I thought, right, okay. So by this time, I kind of had a reasonably decent idea as to what would be involved in designing remote training. We took a completely different direction. We started using the same equipment that we do in clinic, which again is now this, it's full FDA brainwave databases. The base software is called NeuroGuide. It's the top level. And then we did sort of, this is in 2013, I think, we launched our first one. And that was something like Zoom and a remote desktop. And then we'd run the session that way. And again, that, it worked. So we had a working model, but it was clunky. When you're trying to make mouse clicks and make a decent presentation and so on remote desktop, it can be clunky, particularly when you're looking at 35 mouse clicks to launch a session. It can take a while, and client confidence is something that you got to keep, right? Yeah. If they notice any faffing. So I thought, well, let's start out by making a separate practitioner work area and a separate client area. So I built sort of a virtual memory screen going on in the background that the therapist could connect, and that helped. But things were still slow, so I thought, well, maybe let's try a little bit of automation in there and see how that goes.
So that was software development.
Yes, and this is definitely what it turned into. Was a major software development job. We started with a little bit of automation just to sort of speed things along a little bit, so that they wouldn't have to make all the mouse clicks. And then we thought, well, checking our sensor connections. Well, the normal way of checking our sensor connections isn't quite accurate enough. Is there a better way of going about this? So I started doing some maths, got some stuff built, and found a new statistical way of checking sensor connections. So that's another problem solved. There were no good feedback players that worked for us. We built those. It just mushroomed out. And these days we have fully functional.
your helmet, no? You have your helmet.
I
want to see that.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to know what
that's
is
a helmet.
Oh my God,
that's a helmet.
Very nice red color. Very nice.
Yeah, exactly. So
what
each one is a.
What does it detect?
So each one is a sensor.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 19 sensors embedded into here. You just slip the cap on. You put a little gel in to make a good contact between the sensor and the scalp. And what we're looking for is what the brain electrical activity is. And with a 19 sensor spread, we can actually source correlate. So we can say, okay, exactly where is this coming from. So if somebody comes to us because they're having trouble sleeping and they're getting pretty touchy at work and they get into a rage every time they're cut off in traffic, say. So then we get the cap on them and we do a brain map. We say, okay, well, the areas involved in anxiety, fight flight areas are running at 4 times the comfortable rate. So if you're having trouble sleeping and you're getting angry a lot, that's definitely the base of the issue, right? You know, yes, we can see the surface anger and so on, but that's not something that we want to work on. We want to work on the base of the issue, right? What's driving it? So then we'd sort of locate. So let's say hypothetically that there's 150 areas, you know, in communication, in phase, you know, which is speed of connection, and in absolute power, which is the volume of electrical activity going on in there. So we do an analysis. We say, well, okay, it looks like these 150 factors are the ones that are really driving these issues. And then we build a little program for that. And what we do is we monitor what those areas are doing moment to moment. And when they're coming into a more balanced position, we would have, or in this instance, a calmer position. We would have a video playing full brightness and full volume on a screen. Now, the moment, within 1/10 of a second, the moment that the brain starts to slip from that position and starts getting a bit more anxious, then the screen's going to fade and the volume's going to go. And what ends up happening is the person gets a little bit frustrated. You know, they get a bit, well, you know, why can't I?
They want the video.
You know, I'm missing. Yeah, I'm missing my scene. What's going on? The Avengers are going into battle. Why can't I? You know, I can't even see it. And that frustration weakens that brain position. You know, you're giving yourself a signal that's not right. Now, as soon as the brain rebalances, then the screen goes full brightness again and the sound comes back. Then you get that natural little dopamine squirt that goes along with it. Aha, I'm getting it right. And that dopamine squirt strengthens that position.
So this is what we call the biofeedback of your work.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
You're not inducing anything. You are just training them by the feedback to identify by themselves.
Exactly. So we are showing them the direction to comfort.
Yes, the client has to work.
The client has to work. Yeah, a little bit. And you know, again, it depends very much on what it is that we're working on. If we're working on something like focus and concentration, then it is very much when you are concentrating, the video is playing. When you're not concentrating, you know, when you start to drift off, the video will fade. So in that instance, it's very much what you are consciously doing. If we're working on subconscious processes and you know, PTSD, those fight, flight, and freeze responses, and all that amygdala sort of action. If we're working on that, you know, and those sorts of things, those aren't under conscious control anyway. And actually, that is why we use videos, is that when we're working on those lower areas, the person can just sit back, watch the video, and let their brain do its own job, right? They're getting the signal when they are getting it right, and they're getting it when they're not getting it right. And we're there in the background, making it harder, the better they're getting at it. And the net result is that we've, you know, once that person learns how to get their brain into balance, they've got a new skill there. And generally, it's a very familiar feeling. It's like, oh, I used to feel like this when I was 12, or I used to feel like this when I was 7. I remember now.
It connected with memories. You
connect with memories. Now, sometimes it's a place where the person's never been, and that's a very novel feeling. You only start saying, I feel a bit weird. I'm not, you know, I was halfway over a bridge today before I realized I was afraid of bridges. It's, you know, it's the oddest thing.
How easy is it, or how hard is it for the client to go back? Is it easy to reproduce? Well, you train them, fine, during the session, but when the session is finished in their normal life, what is the impact?
Okay.
How they
Well,
can we create?
well, you know, we always tend towards happiness. You know, we know it within ourselves. You know, we don't like discomfort. We shy away from discomfort. We draw towards happiness and, you know, and contentment and that neutral point that's sort of within all of us. That's what we draw towards. So once a person starts to rediscover that, starts to say, I remember this. Yes, yes, that's right. And you know, they will trend towards that. So once they're faced with the, let's take that fellow that was getting into a rage when he was cut off in traffic.
Yeah.
Okay. So next time he gets cut off in traffic and suddenly there's a moment of pause there where there wasn't before. I could get angry at this, or I could not get angry at this. And of course, whatever he's choosing is what he's reinforcing. The brain's like a muscle, right? Whatever you use more grows stronger, and that's why things like childhood issues and so on grow with age. You know, something that happened in your preteens doesn't impact you at all in your teens. It's a niggle in your 20s. It's an issue in your 30s. It's a problem in your 40s, and that's because you just, if that pattern is there and you keep using it, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's how we get locked into these patterns. And rebalancing is just reminding, right, where that neutral position is. For the body-centered approaches, it can be related to that as well. If your shoulders are up like this for 20 years, they're not uncomfortable at all, right? All of those tense muscles and all of that stuff, it's just locked in as a permanent pattern. Well, as soon as you get your shoulders down to here, then the feeling is very much like, oh, well, that's better.
Yes.
You recognize the balance point.
Right. So
it's like,
there is also biological consequences, not only because of the endocrine hormones, endocrine balance, but also musculoskeletal nervous impact.
Yes.
Because
yes, exactly.
that can triggers the problem in the cervical, the problem in the jaw.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The problem in the skull and the spine, and then the stomach, etc. It can
it
has a lot of domino effect on the rest of the body.
Absolutely. But of course, that is all driven by the emotional system.
Yeah.
Which resides within the central nervous system, right? So in here, it's kind of like a guru getting in there and showing you, move your brain this way, move your brain this way, move your brain this way, right? Until we get it down into a nice balance, until we get it down into a nice balanced position. So yes, you're absolutely right. If there's a trauma, as we can see from adverse childhood experiences, the studies done on that, if there's a trauma, yes, absolutely. If your nervous system is under undue strain for the better part of your life, then you're at higher risk for Parkinson's, MS, all the great spread of diseases that we get. So yes, certainly.
And as opposed, if you relieve that stress, if you resolve this PTSD symptoms, you break the structure of it, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Have you observed some healing about physical healing among your clients?
Absolutely, yes. That the vast majority of people that come to us because other things haven't worked, right? They've gone down the hypnotherapy route, they've gone down the talking therapy route, they've gone down the medication route, they've gone down all of these things, and showing them where that balance, teaching them to shift their own nervous system position, teaching them how to shift their own emotional position on a functional level, is a very precise way of going about it. And of course, we can map as well as we go. So it's not well, maybe this is helping and maybe it's not. As we're an English-based business, so of course, many English people aren't as in touch with,
Yes.
particularly the private school bunch, aren't necessarily so in touch with the shifts that happen within themselves.
You're going to save the country.
And yes, and meditators and so on, notice the difference in their meditations within a few sessions. 4 or 5 sessions. For somebody who's not quite so in touch with themselves, it might take them a dozen sessions to notice it. And that's where the empirical comes in very, very nicely. We can say, okay, right, at session 1, this is what your brain looked like. At session 6, this is what your brain looks like now. At session 12, this is what your brain looks like now. By mapping it. Exactly.
What does the brain map looks like? Does it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Let's pull one up. Okay. Go to map 1. They're on your side. Okay. So on this example here, and that's on sheet map 1. Now, each of these circles is a topographic. So you can see the nose up at the top and the ears over to the side. And each of the points within the circle head is a sensor.
Okay.
Now, below each one, we have a scale from going into the hotter colors, going to the overactivity, and into the cooler colors, the blues and the greens, we're heading into underactivity. Now, this particular example is all overactivity, so we're not going to have to worry about the under in this case. Above each picture, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hertz going all the way up. And actually, we run these up to 30 hertz. Now, the function of each is slightly different. And actually, where it resides in the body is different as well.
Is that what we call theta brain?
No, actually, we're starting with, well, yes. So delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma.
Oh.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Now, one thing about brainwaves, they're divided into classifications, but really it's a continuous spectrum. So the difference between, say, a high theta and a low alpha is going to be minimal, whereas a mid theta and a mid alpha is going to be quite large because we're talking about a spectrum here. Right. So no matter how it's classified,
right,
it is all continuous. So this 1, 2, 3 hertz, this is developing between womb and about 3 years old. And so in an adult, it becomes the deep unconscious. So if you think of all of those things that are developing within a baby, those become delta within an adult. And actually babies have majority delta because there isn't much higher cognitive thought going on, right? They're getting their their basic stuff. Now 4, 5, 6, 7 hertz, that's most active during dreaming sleep. So you can think of it as your subconscious, whereas the delta would be more your unconscious. Oh. Now it's developing between maybe 3 and about 10 or 11, I guess, and it does vary a bit for each individual. And so it's dream state stuff, dream, intuition,
creativity,
fears,
also
fears. Oh yeah, fears, damage. All of that stuff that you collect within your childhood. That's where it resides.
Oh, is that?
So certainly if we start coming to brainwave entrainment and so on, which elevates certain brainwaves, the descriptions can be a little bit, can be slightly deceptive. Yes, theta is intuition and trauma resolution and all this stuff, but it is where we hold our fears and hold a good portion of our junk.
Oh, I did not know that.
So yes, elevating theta when there are unresolved issues. Again, not a good idea. Now, the division between 7 and 8 is, when you're heading to sleep and you're both still in the room and you're partially in a dream, that feeling. That is when you're making that division between 7 or between 8 and going down to 7 hertz. And actually, it's something that we share with all of the animals as well. So Now, interestingly, the 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 resonance of the planet is actually at 7.8 hertz as well. That exact division between the conscious and the subconscious.
This is the Schumann resonance.
Schumann resonance, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's something that we share with all animals. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hertz is called alpha. And when we're talking alpha, we're talking being clear and present and in the moment. So now the resting state of the brain is actually 10.5 hertz. The resting state of the brain is not 0, it's 10.5. And that maintains the nervous system tone. When you're doing any preliminary meditations, the power of now, the Lam Rim, prayer, any of this stuff, that is all about cultivating alpha. It's all about cultivating the ability to be present. Because the greater your ability to be present, the better you're going to do at your later stages of trauma resolution and so on. You know, if you go into trauma resolution and you're unable to stay present with it, present and conscious with it, it takes you over.
Trauma will raise and will take all the place.
Exactly. As opposed to that strong ability to be present with the trauma, in which case, you know, the view on it is a little different. It's like, oh, that's interesting. There's a lot of anger arising here. I can see that is due to this, 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 and this. I'm not going to react off of that. And that's what the alpha gives you. And that's why it's so important. And that's why all of the traditional methods all start with being present.
Well,
anyway.
Hold on. You talked about our psychic garbage that is stocked somewhere in the theta, right? And you're talking about alpha. Are you telling that alpha can help us to clear out this psychic garbage in a way by some process? How does it happen? How do we expel this?
Well, it prepares you. It prepares you for getting rid of it. So of course, you know, the first meditations are all about all about getting present. Meditations following that are then all about going into dream state and being present within your dream state. And it's called alpha theta. On a brain level, it's called alpha theta. On the traditional methods, it's the balancing of the Ida and Pingala. And breath exercises can be excellent for it. You know, again, it's what we do through neurofeedback. Body work is also very, very good for it. It's something that you see when in a body work client, when the client gets into a trance-like state,
right?
And then suddenly all of their material starts to emerge, and generally that's in quite a violent way in the bodywork traditions. Very effective.
Does theta alpha is like awakened dream?
Exactly, because your alpha is high, so you're awake and you're present with it, and you're in your theta, so you're pulling up old material, so old subconscious material.
Act on it.
So you can stay present with it and not have it be
immersed,
taking you over, not having you can witness the emotion without experiencing the emotion.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, alpha is a very interesting, I'll get into the betas and stuff in a minute, but alpha is really, really quite interesting and how the brain works with it. Now, our alpha is 10.5 hertz.
Yeah.
Right? If that alpha is healthy, so as in it's not vigilant alpha or wariness alpha or false alpha is what we call it in the brain world. If it's a healthy alpha, then 10.5 is sticking like that, and then you're going to get a resonance at 22.
What?
Or 21. Sorry, 21. 10.5, double it, 21 hertz.
How come?
So well, just like sonic, just like sound.
Really?
You're going to get resonances.
Wow.
So that's how you can tell the difference between healthy alpha and unhealthy alpha. If your alpha is high and there are no resonances, then we've got an what we call a vigilant or wariness alpha, where you're always sort of scanning your environment. You're always present scanning your environment, looking for what's coming next.
As opposed to
And that's not the kind of alpha we want. You know? So if that is the case, then you don't get the resonances. No idea why. If it is the healthy alpha, then your alpha will be up here, 10.5. You'll get another resonance at 21. You get another resonance at 42.
Is the peak lower? The resonance?
The peak is lower.
Okay.
The peak is lower. However, now what we're talking about is cycles per second. So at 12 cycles per second, right? They're large waves.
Right.
Or at 10.5, let's say, at 10.5 cycles per second, they're large waves. At 21, they're much more rapid. There's more information passing more quickly. Once we start getting up into 42 hertz, right, doubling again, then gamma is where we start getting out of the realm of neuronal firing. Neurons only fire up to 38 cycles per second. They can do short bursts of more, but essentially the potassium ions won't reset past that.
What happened then?
So, well, you can do short bursts of more, and then it starts dying out. However, that the 40 hertz and above, right? Monks can sustain that for a good long period of time. It doesn't have to do with neuronal firing. It's a resonance. It's a non-physical.
So it's not the wave. It's the resonance of the alpha. Is it?
It's the resonance of the alpha. Exactly.
And what about those that can reach the 60s and up? Because I've heard that some are resonating higher than 40.
Well, yes, of course. These resonances will continue going up. Then we start getting into problems with measurement. As soon as those frequencies start getting above 50 hertz, they get almost impossible to study. There's too much information passing too quickly. Also, the funding for the studies isn't great on that because it is over the proper neuronal firing level, in which case they're dismissed as spare noise. And they were all dismissed as spare noise up until a few years ago, when they were doing studies on the Dalai Lama's monks.
But what do you think? Do you really think that's noise, or do you think that's junk, or is there something?
Oh, it's functional. It's functional. It's doing something. Yes.
But
yes.
You don't know what.
But when certainly in the 40 to 42 hertz range, it's well studied. We know exactly what that's doing, and that arises during extremely complex thought. Now, when you think you've got a large amount of information passing very quickly, it takes a lot of energy to do that. Okay. Now, when if the other areas are still doing these large waves, you'll never hear this bit.
Right.
So when the brain is in a good, calm, steady position, then those very higher frequencies, you can start to get in touch with them. And during compassion meditations, feelings of universal love, stuff like this, when they studied the more advanced Buddhist meditations, gamma was jumping to 60 times what they had ever recorded before.
Right.
Clearly, it's working and it's at play.
Yes.
It's not neuronal.
Yes.
And it's not neuronally driven.
Also. This is where I wanted to go, because some healers are getting waves that are peaking at a very high rate. I mean,
well, yes. Now there's
getting
there's high in volume and there's high in frequency.
Right.
So healers are all slightly different. Some healers go into a trance, right? In which case they're down in theta, right? And they're in that open, intuitive spot. Other healers are more in the alpha, and if they're more in the alpha, then they're much more present with the process that they're doing. They're present and disengaged. Much like if you're a good skier, you're not thinking about what you're doing when you're skiing, you're just letting your body do it. And that's very much the alpha type healer. where and actually they'll be the telepaths as well. It's very high in the alpha. They're present with it. They're present and disengaged,
Right.
as opposed to in a dream state and letting their subconscious do it automatically that way, or their intuition, or however you want to describe it. Gamma is always a factor. However, and of course there's any combination as well of
Yeah,
these
well, they might
of these patterns. We're all
have
unique.
thousands of combinations.
Absolutely. Some of us go into being present and slipping down into theta and getting intuitive and slipping back into the alpha again and making decisions and going back down. And if the brain gets quiet enough, then you might even hear speech instructions or something as to how to proceed or what to do. There you go, and that's your gamma, coming through.
Oh, really?
Right. And generally it comes with that expansive sort of feeling. Yeah. So yeah,
It's it's limitless.
It is limitless. It is limitless. Now, it should be said as well that there's a lot of sort of dodgy stuff out there around brainwaves, and the 110 hertz and the 650 hertz and all of this stuff. None of it really has any base in the actual nervous system.
What are they?
Well, I mean, they're good marketing tactics. Things for stuff like brainwave entrainment. They're ones that are big on these very, very high frequencies, and really yes, resonances do carry on above, but if you're really fundamentally looking to facilitate change, you need to work on the basic neuronal firing that is causing that is generating all of these resonances above. Right. So just like anything else, you don't want to go for the higher practices until you've mastered the beginning practices, because otherwise you get things like Kundalini madness and all of these things that we see. Well, it's dangerous and deeply uncomfortable. I can tell you from personal experience, because I'm never a good one for following the instructions. I always go for
because we know, for your information and the benefit of the audience, Kundalini is awakening in circulating in the Ida Pingala and Sushumna also, right?
Yes.
And if there is a energy residue that is there, bad energy residue, it is going to awake it. So
absolutely, and that is exactly that. Yes, no, you're absolutely right. In the Eastern, you'd call it the Id and Pingala, and you'd call it balancing the sun and moon. In the Western, we'd call that sympathetic parasympathetic, and you're balancing the vagal. Whatever language you use, it's the same process. Yes. Same process.
Ida Pingala is the energy structure over that.
Yes.
It's not visible to the naked eye, yet it is there, and there is energy circulating in that. You might be extraterrestrial for your community of brainwave therapists, huh? Are you? Because they are
well, I used to be, but we're getting kind of long in the tooth these days. We've been at this longer than pretty much anybody else, and we've certainly generated our sort of the new standard for how these things are, for how neurofeedback is delivered. So yes, it used to be a problem, but now that we're sort of on the senior end of it, it is less of a problem.
Yes, because you are well documented. Also, you're not just name dropping things. You know what you're talking about.
Well, yes, exactly. So now we're starting to bring a few of the newer practitioners along with us, in looking at things in a slightly different way.
Right.
In a traditional sense, you would get a brain map and you would compare to brain areas and analyze the heck out of it. Whereas the way we learned and the way we continue to do it is, no, this is how the person feels. This is what we're looking at in a brain map is, how does it feel to be this person? And working from there. If I were this person and things look like this, Okay, I can see I'm a little afraid. I can see I'm a little frozen down. Okay, this is my symptom spread. What's the base of this issue? How do we get down to the base of this and fix it? And actually, this would be a good time to head over to map 2.
Yeah.
So this is actually the same. This is actually the same person. Now, in map 1, we saw certainly in those lower frequencies, as we do in map 2, that the activity is very, very high. Now, in this particular individual, in map 1, we saw the anxiety was really very high. When we started getting up above the 12 thing, there was a lot of, above 12 to 15 hertz. You can think of that as like musing, where your brain is sort of constantly ticking over. Once we start getting into the 20s, then you're doing simple mathematics and forward planning and stuff like this. When we start getting above that, then we start getting into curiosity, novelty, anxiety, anything that feels up and buzzy within your body. It's going to be high frequency activity. Anything that's low and sluggish is going to be low frequency activity, like a hangover would be, as being very high in delta, where you're sort of seeing the world through treacle pudding.
Right.
So going from map 1 to map 2, this is the same person. And once we started to calm down that anxiety, then, the fatigue was left, that low end fatigue. But as soon as that anxiety started to drop out, heading over to map 3, then we can see that rest was suddenly possible, right? Sleep improved, overall balance improved, general nervous system healing started to improve, and then we just started to see those low frequencies drop out naturally as soon as that anxiety was taken care of. And this is a 20 session. This is a 20 session spread. So we're looking at first map to the 10th session, 0 session to 10th session to 20th session.
Right.
And the amount less noise in there, it just transforms your perception of the world. As soon as the world is no longer threatening and there's not a million things going on in your brain keeping you away from yourself, as we all know.
Yeah.
Right?
So
as soon as those things start to calm down, then that intrinsic self starts to come forward again.
They become much better person.
Well, they become much more their own person, much more the person that they were born as, rather than the person that they've learned to become because of their, if a tactic has worked for us once, we will continue that pattern. Right. And it's these things, it's these little patterns, it's these little habits. Here's a good example. If we're very, very busy at work for 2 or 3 days, then generally it's only going to take us, I don't know, maybe a weekend to come down to a base level again, right? If we're busy for 2 weeks, then, well, it might take us 3 or 4 days. Well, if we start to get too busy, too stressed out for sort of 3 weeks, 4 weeks solid, then we start to lose the sense as to where neutral is. We start to lose the sense as to where non-stressed is. And these things start to set in as like the new normal. A bit like your shoulders, right? Normal, okay, I can deal with this for a bit. Okay, this is, if they've been up like this for a while, oh, that's normal now. One doesn't even notice. And it's the same thing with the brain, right? Brain positions. And we learn to get locked into these brain positions.
Right.
Nervous system positions, muscle positions, all sorts of positions.
Nervous system,
self.
Well, all the systems are, because there is a cascade impact on all the rest, right?
Exactly. And of course, when these things are very loud, then you'll never get in touch with true universal love, or that feeling of true intimate connection. All of these gamma, right? All of these higher capacities that really we all look for.
Let's talk about the spirituality also, in a way.
Well, yes.
That's the spirituality that we can access.
Absolutely. And from a brain point of view, spirituality is just one of those things that naturally comes as soon as things are in good balance.
Mhm.
You start to have a bit more of a sense as to who's going to call before they're going to call, and you
Right.
start having a, you know, and you start maybe uh, melding with your partner, perhaps a little more. And these are, and then these are skills that you can then start to develop. Now, actually, another thing that we can do, and something that we're really pioneering right now, is um, taking people towards meditation positions. Because of course, what I've been talking about so far is problem solving.
Right.
When there's something that's out of balance that we need to get into balance, when somebody's uncomfortable with something that we're looking to fix. And unfortunately, that's fortunately or unfortunately, that's the majority of work that we do, is getting people out of their stuck positions. Now, there's another way of going as well, in that we want to take people towards a meditative position. So let's say there's a certain meditation that somebody's trying to accomplish. Well, we can put in the parameters to when you are approaching that meditation, that correct position, right? And when you're moving away from that correct position,
Right.
and then leading the person into that sweet spot,
Right. Right. Right.
right? So they can learn how to get there, so they're not having to mess around in their own mind looking for where that position is.
Right. So, right. Wow. I mean, I have 2,000 questions. I will try to again summarize. I'd like to talk about the company now. You created BrainWorks a couple of years ago, and now you can work remote. You become psychic.
Well, actually, I started out that way, but yeah, it does
Right
help
now,
things along.
you work your remote process and equipment is working and improved,
Yes,
so you can work
yep.
and wherever the people are in the world.
Wherever the people are. Now we operate in, the UK. We're a London-based company, so we operate throughout the UK and Europe for our company, and we've got partners sort of all around the world who are now starting to use our remote equipment. With the onset of the virus, um, it was quite interesting timing. The virus hit 3 days after I had just finished up the last of our wish list on our software. So I thought, well, okay, this is, and then 3 days later, Italy closed their borders. And I thought, well, this is really interesting timing, isn't it? Everybody needs remote neurofeedback all of a sudden. And look at that. I got
I
it. So,
told you, you're psychic.
well, no, that was, well, that was, that had nothing to do with me. Might have had something to do with gamma, but it had nothing to do with me. It was just. But one has to take notice of those interesting
Fact.
those interesting things those interesting synchronicities that
Yes,
happen. So
yes.
I took note. Yes, and
Things,
I'm long enough in the tooth that I took note of it. So I thought, right, okay, well, I guess we're selling software now. So um, I plowed at it morning through night for 2 weeks to get it into sales shape, and there we
it
go.
worked.
So now all of a sudden we're supplying advanced remote equipment um, everywhere. I hadn't realized how far ahead we were on
Mm.
this front, because of course this wasn't anything that we were looking at selling. It was something that we used. Um, and when the virus hit and I jumped on a few of the webinars as to how to do remote training, I had to look at it and I thought, oh my God, we ditched that stuff 10 years ago.
So right
It didn't
now
work.
you're doing it. You're doing webinars. You're doing online training. How does it work? You said that you are having some branches all over the world. How does it work? People purchase your equipment and your knowledge and then apply. How does it work?
Yes, exactly. So it's, each one is a separate company. Each one is their own practitioner's company. We provide the software, the hardware, the system itself, and of course we are we are a practice as well. We're a therapy practice. We've got several dozen of these things out in the field, which are constantly working. And yes, we sell equipment to other practitioners now.
But they have to learn the techniques.
Well, either they have to learn the techniques. So what we have developed is the delivery platform.
Okay.
So there's still a practitioner needed to devise the training protocol. Now, we provide that for other clinics on occasion. There are many other professionals that are more than capable of doing that themselves as well. So, you know, for the larger clinic outfits that we're supplying, for those that we're supplying to that are larger clinic outfits, they already have that stuff covered. They've got their team of specialists, and we simply supply the equipment and they deliver the neurofeedback through that platform. For other ones who don't know the system so well, then they simply buy a piece of equipment. It heads out to the client. We take care of the mapping. We take care of the protocol design. We upload the protocol, and in some cases, we take care of the actual training as well. So it's all person to person. It's really what works.
You share the revenue with these people.
We have a flat hourly, and and then that client can charge whatever they like. We're 85 pounds an hour. Whatever that practitioner wants to charge is that's all up to them.
Oh, all right, I understand. Yeah. Wow. So what's next for your company? What's next for you? Because you seem that you're trained and you're attuned, and your personal life is now at its peak. So are you going to quit Earth?
Well, hopefully not for a little while yet.
No.
We'll see how it goes. I mean, basically, we're just taking things when we have always, ever since we began the company, and actually before that, things have just progressed along swimmingly. Everything has happened just at the right time, and mostly unforeseen, actually. So I personally am absolutely fine with that. I just charge along and take each situation as it comes, and then we end up somewhere really quite special.
Like recently.
Well, very much like, yes, very much like recently. In developing one of my initial goals in first developing the remote system was to have something that could actually deliver the sessions on its own. And I had to look at it and I thought, that's just not possible. That's just never going to happen. But it was kind of the initial goal. And I thought, well, okay, so let's start on this and see what can be done though. And 7 years later, we were in a position where many things were automated, and I kind of finished up one portion of the programming, and I sat back and I had a look at the full package, and I thought, oh my God, we're only 2 components and a voice coach away from having the computer deliver the sessions completely on its own. I thought, wow, okay, good. Well, then I guess I'm building a couple of components and a synthetic voice.
Does people that has a good computer then can only purchase the program and the device and the cap, or do you really need to have a consecrated computer for that?
You do need a dedicated computer for it. It takes a lot of resources. So I mean, a modern i5 will do it with some dedicated video. I mean, basically, you're looking at sort of US dollars, $700-800 for a computer. The actual equipment itself is reasonably expensive. The amplifiers themselves are sort of $4,000, and we don't use basic training software. We use the proper professional. I mean, essentially, we have got it down to just under 10,000 US for a system. Which is a major leap forward, actually. 7 years ago, we were looking at almost 20,000 for a delivery platform. Through some creative deals and some new products that have come out, yes, we have got that down to under 10,000. Our software is only 700
All right.
US,
So
$699.
the patient has to purchase that equipment, or the practitioner has to purchase that equipment?
Well, if a patient wants their own equipment, which in many ways doesn't necessarily make economic sense, because you can rent the equipment, do your sessions, and and then you're good to go. If so, most clients, the vast majority of clients, don't buy their own equipment, right? We send it out as part of the sessions, and that's how most practitioners would run it. Practitioners themselves, yes, I absolutely, and that's either for running it in. People are using our remote equipment both for running in clinic so that it can be automated within clinic, and they're saving wages, right? In which case the session cost is coming down, or they're renting them out.
For someone that already has a very powerful computer left unused, they can use that computer, and only for that purpose, isn't it?
They can. They can, yes.
All they
The
have
setup
to
that we've
is the plug-in device and the caps and all. This is all that.
Yes. Yes, exactly, and the software and the support and so on.
And they have to send the cap and the connective device to their clients.
Exactly. Or or like I say, the client purchases that themselves. We connect remotely. We run the session just as we would in the clinic, or once the person is comfortable working on their own, they're competent at setting their own cap, then we release it over to them, and we simply check in once a week for the mapping and the tracking, and making sure that everything's on, and everything's tracking as it should be.
So on their side, they has a client-based, I would say, client-based software, I imagine, and the device is connected through a USB on their laptop.
Correct.
And the cap is connected to this device, to the USB, to a client-based software that send, I guess, tell me if it's right, but
yeah,
the specific brain mapping that they are receiving to you, and you on your side, you identify the session to this patient, and then you can work with that.
Exactly. And then we see how that training session went. We can produce new maps off of that as well, make any changes that need making, and we upload that to the remote computer. It's set up much like it's a 2-click process. It's set up much like a public mall kiosk, really, where there is nowhere for the client to go wrong.
Wow.
Yeah, it is particular.
Why not?
Yeah, it is particularly slick. I'm quite pleased with it.
Wow, that's fantastic. So the software based, I mean, you develop, are you a programmer? Did you or you have programmers that were working with you? How did you work?
Well, my father bought a computer in '78. And back in '78, if you wanted your computer to do anything, you had to program it to do that. I mean, we're talking the old cassette tape drives, right?
Right.
So I became reasonably competent. By the time '82, '83 rolled around, I was a pretty decent. I mean, those are very good learning years as well. I mean, I wasn't old. So, I got pretty decent at it by about sort of 15 years old. I was a decent programmer. But at that time, then you could start buying your own programs, and I thought, well, I don't particularly want to be a programmer. There's no money in that. There's no jobs in computer programming. So I'll just buy my programs from now on. When we came to develop this one, I tried with a couple of companies first. And the end result
was not good.
Was really not the direction that I wanted to go as well. Of course, when you approach a programming company, they want to build it the way they want to build it, not the way it's going to work, right? And we are practitioners dealing with clients. We're not a software company. Right. We need something that works for our clinicians and works for our clients, not something that is hypothetically good or cheaper to produce. Or so we tried with a couple of companies. nothing worked out the way I was. So the way I wanted it. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to have to relearn. I guess I'm going to have to relearn how to program.
In
And
what
actually,
language? In what language did you use? Java?
well, there's a few. There was some.
C++, Java.
There's yeah. There's some C. There was a bit of Java. There was a bit of AutoHot. There was many. Depends on which component it is
Okay,
that we're talking about. So yeah, but I got there in the end.
yeah, apparently.
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
there. Wow.
yeah.
And
And then
what about your partners in the business? Are they doing the same thing as you?
yes, yep, yeah, absolutely. We've got we've got our London clinic. My wife, so Christina, that's who runs the London clinic. She's been our business partner since just about when we started. My wife, of course, is the other business partner. She handles all the logistics, accounts. She keeps us running, basically.
Wow.
It's not Christina and my strength, but Sarah comes up with, right, this is the
But
bottom line. This is what we need
she
to.
can manage.
Absolutely, yeah. And as far as our clinicians, we have an almost impossible, not almost impossible. There are no experienced clinicians in the UK to hire. So we've had to go abroad for that. And again, that's where the remote really helps us out. So that our morning team is out of Belgium. We've got a couple of great neuropsychologists, people that we can't get in the UK. And for our evening sessions, we use people out of the States, West Coast particularly, where the practitioner's skill level is very high,
Right.
and there's not enough clients for the number of practitioners. So again, we can help fill that hole. They can work for us in the evening. It's still in prime workday time for them. Professional work hours, and we can still run up to 11 p.m. for our sessions. So
What about Asia?
what about Asia? Well, yeah, get us a few practitioners out there, and that'll help us out. We
I'm
are training them up as we are training them up.
curious.
It takes time, just like any career. You'd be looking at a good 3 years, until you're up and running on your own. But now it's got to be said as well, there is more basic equipment out there. You can get you can get basic consumer systems with one sensor. You can get package systems with a couple of sensors and pre-built protocols and so on. So there are easier ways to get into it, but these are systems that practitioners move from, not to. Right?
Right.
It's
Right.
a good way to get your feet wet. It's a good way to understand what you're doing, and then you can start moving on to more advanced equipment.
Right.
It's cheaper for the client. Your results are more predictable, more trackable.
But you get results.
Well, yes, with the more advanced equipment, you can see exactly what you're doing. You can pinpoint exactly where the problem is, and you know exactly what the result is going to be. When you start getting onto the simpler equipment, without the mapping, or with more basic mapping, you get an idea as to where the problem is, and you can broadly hit it. But of course, your results are going to be a bit more unpredictable.
Right.
And generally, you're not building that protocol for the client on those more basic systems, where, of course, as you start to progress into the more advanced, then instead of training 2 factors at a time, you're training 150 factors, 200 factors at a time.
Right.
And you know exactly what your end result is going to be.
Right.
Right.
Wow, that's just amazing. I can't believe. I mean, that there is a lot of possibility with this, and the client doesn't even has to verbalize so much about his personal history. It just has to.
No. Well, actually, we can tell them their personal history from their map. Yeah. No, they don't have to tell us. I mean, we do ask. We do get a proper set of intake forms so that we can see if it's a good case for us and stuff like that. But essentially, you can do a dry reading on a map, and you can say, well, okay, it looks like around the birth period, there was a loneliness, abandonment style trauma. Was there any incubator time, for instance? or was there any problem, was there a pierced placenta or something like that? Or you can see something along the fight, flight, freeze lines in the teens that is malinforming the cortex. In which case you can say, okay, well, it looks like sort of between the ages of 12 and 15, there was a combined fight, flight, freeze style trauma. Was there a sexual abuse issue in that particular set?
Yes.
And the answer is always going to be yes.
Yes, you can see it
Yeah,
clearly, right?
you can see
So
it. You can see it clearly.
for the people that want to reach you, I guess that they only have to browse on your website, huh?
Yes, yeah, we've got a lot of information on our website. We got about 90 pages stretching into the background in
Wow.
there. So yes, a lot can be found. Pop me an email through the through the contact forms as
Right.
well.
I will write down your contact details below that.
Lovely.
Wow. Well, James, my brain is full.
We could go on for a week.
I I know, I know.
It's such a broad topic.
James, that was a great pleasure. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon. Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right. Goodbye
All
now.
right.
Bye.
Goodbye.